Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com. I've been PvPing a lot in Elder Scrolls Online, Waking Flames, and loving it. And one build I want to share with you is the Stamina Warden build, updated the Eraser for Update 31 ESO. What the Warden excels at is having high burst, great mobility, and incredible survivability. The thing I like about the Stamina Warden, it uses both magic and stamina to survive. And once you begin to learn the timing and the skills, you can burst down players and or groups in today's game. So you're going to want to watch this. If that sounds like a good build for you, let's get to it. Some pros and cons to the Warden, specifically stamina, is it has great self-healing and survivability. It's very fast because their skill in your class can get major expedition, so consider this great escape ability. And it has one of the easiest and simplest burst combos I'm going to explain to you, allowing you to be pretty good straight out the gate with this class. The cons, and the way I have it set up, is it's limited in group utility, and the gear can be quite difficult to obtain. But if those pros outweigh the cons for you, this is what I came up with. We're going to start with gear first, and that's what most folks want to know about. If you haven't watched any of my previous videos, the too long didn't read version of what's going on in PvP in today's game is there's 3 highly and or overtuned sets, and it's kind of be kill or be killed. So you can either use them and do well, or you can not use them and get dunked on. So those 3 sets are Hrothgar's Chill. This is the heavy armor set. This comes in Rewards of the Worthy. The light armor set's called Dark Convergence, and the medium armor set's called Plague Break. I've tested all 3 out. My opinion is Hrothgar is really strong and fits this build the best. I can see Dark Convergence getting nerfed, and Plague Break has some good utility, but I didn't think it was that good on this specific build. So we're going to use one of those offensive sets, Hrothgar, and how we're going to use it is putting 1 piece on our body, 2 jewelry with our weapons. What Hrothgar's is going to do, stunning or immobilizing enemies causes them to burst with frost damage, chilled status effect, perfect for a Warden, dealing 26% of total physical and spell resistance as frost damage to themselves and enemies within 8 meters. And this has a 7-second cooldown. What this essentially does is allows you to burst down large groups with 1 Dawnbreaker. It's going to absolutely flatten the earth. The more people that are in this area, the harder it's going to hit. Another thing that I like about it, it also has a mobilization. So we set up our front bar using poisons, escapist poison specifically, to immobilize our enemies. And you're using the 2H because you can do the off-balance medium weave and proc it as well. So there's quite a bit of ways to proc this on the Warden. This set can be used in smaller groups, but it's really designed to fight outnumbered in large groups. A couple of flexible options if you don't want to go this route and or it gets nerfed is Mechanical Acuity is number 1. This is going to be 6 trait, craftable, Clockwork City, and it's going to give you 100% crit chance for 5 seconds with a long cooldown of 21 seconds. It's really good as well because you'll be able to time your burst window and do a whole lot of damage, single target or in a group. And if you're someone that wants to play in no procs, I'd go with staples like Hunding's Rage and Spriggans, but I spend most of my time in CP and proc PvP. So Hrothgar and Chill, as I like to call it, it's going to be our offensive set, and our back bar is going to contain our defensive set. That's Daedric Trickery. This is 8 trait and Morrowind DLC Vardenfell craftable. When you deal damage, it's going to give you 1 of 5 buffs. Each of them are fantastic survivability tools, and you can proc it by light attack weaving, heavy attack, Arctic Blast, or whatever on your back bar, so it's easy to maintain a lot of uptime on this. Previous builds I've went with Iron Blood, but I can't just deal with the negative speed downsides, and I really prefer Daedric Trickery, plus it's very simple and easy to get a hold of. Again, a couple alternatives if you're playing no proc PvP, Mark of the Pariah or Buffer of Swift. Mark of the Pariah had used to be the previous meta, stacking a lot of resistances, and it made you really tanky. The problem is people like me and a lot of others running Hrothgars will make you get bursted down if you're stacking resistances. So a lot of folks defensively out there have switched to either skills and gear that reward damage reduction versus flat out without massive mitigation, because the more massive mitigation you have, the easier target you are. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to use Danger Trickery. We're also going to stack a lot of max HP and other things because we don't want to be a walking target to other folks using Hrothgars. So we have a front bar set, 5-piece offensive. We have a back bar defensive set. I go sword and shield on my back bar. I go my front bar sword. The traits I like to use: sharpen on my front, powered and sturdy on my back. And then that leaves one piece of jewelry, and we're going to use a mythic. You have a couple of different choices. For really optimal proc damage, I'd go with Malakast Band of Brutality. This is quite difficult to get a hold of, but it's going to increase your damage done by 16% and decrease your crit damage done by 50%. Well, if you don't know, procs can't crit anyways, so we don't really need a whole lot of crit on this build if we're going to run the proc loadout. So this makes it hit much harder and sacrifices really not too much, considering this is going to be our main bursting tool. All around, however, I would go with Death Dealer's Fate. What this is going to do, especially in long-term fights, is going to give you a plethora of max stats. Yes, I used a big word there. Max stats are very useful on a Warden, specifically health, because one of our heals is scaling off of this, making us very survivable and adding damage. So I'd highly recommend Death Dealer's Fate all around. And if you don't have mythics, you could always slot a piece of trainee here to get more max stats. And that's going to leave the Monster Helm. So you're going to have a couple different choices here. Battle Orgs is what I really like. It's going to be a high bursting tool. You can find this in the Dungeon of March of Sacrifice, and you can buy the shoulder from the vendor. Essentially, you can save up your ultimate to 500, and when you activate it for 12 seconds, you're going to get a flood of weapon damage, and penetration is exactly the two things we need to burst down groups. So between Hrothgars and a 500 stack Dawnbreaker, you're going to absolutely decimate one player or a stack of them. Now that leaves one piece left, and that's with the trainee. It's simply put, if you have one piece, it gives you the most max stats. What I went with is 5 medium, so I could use shuffle, 2 heavy, prismatic glyphs on my head, chest, and legs, and stamina on the rest, with escapist poisons on my front bar, at least 1 stamina recovery glyph, and I would go with the jewelry being swift. That's going to give you the escapability that you need without using Wild Hunt as your mythic slot. So you're going to get a lot of escapability, and the mythic Death Dealer's Fate will give you the max stats that you're going to lose from the jewelry trait. So now you know about the gear, let's switch gears and talk about the skills. See what I did there? Front bar, we're going to go with two-hander. The reason I've been using a two-hander lately is the combo is a lot easier to pull off, and it has great resource sustain with the Battle Rush passive, along with the follow-up passive giving us an extra bit of burst, 10% direct damage after we do a fully charged heavy. Essentially, it's perfect for a simple combo and resource sustain. The bar Subterranean Assault is the first ability, bursting tool, and it syncs very well with the fully charged heavy attack due to its time duration. So as soon as you activate this, you wait just a little bit of time and then activate a fully charged heavy attack, and you can essentially land them both at the exact same time. We'll get to the more of the combo later, but that's the premise of it. Next up is Rally. This is a burst heal that helps with our proc weapon and weapon damage buff, and you can recast it whenever you want for a little bit of healing. A popular ability up there is Bull Netch, and the reason I'm not using the Netch anymore is because it will cleanse negative effects. This sounds really good, and it has been really good, but what's going to happen is folks are going to be running that medium armor rewards of the worthy set called Plague Break, and if you cleanse accidentally, or the Netch does it, or you auto-cast it, or whatever, you might take 5,000 damage out of nowhere, 10,000 damage out of nowhere, because you're cleansing this effect. So you have to be cognizant of the context of what you're playing, and if you're in Cyrodiil facing large groups, I guarantee you someone's going to run Plague Break, and if you cleanse this off accidentally, it's going to blow up with the explosion of damage, and you're going to be in trouble. So I drop it, not worth it. I use Rally instead. Birds of Prey is up next. Just slotting it gives us increased damage by 5%, but when you click it, you're going to get a burst of speed, and that's what I love about this ability, is clicking it and you just zip on off, especially if you have the Swift Jewelry and a champion point celerity, which we'll get to in a minute. Dizzying Swing, it's the burst spammable that can be medium wave to stun targets, and it sets them off balance. People don't like you using this. I don't actually like using it either, but it's quite effective, and you have to do what is the most effective for you and your build, and this is our main spammable. Now Executioner is next, and that's going to be our finisher, so about sub 35 to 45% health single target. This is what you're going to switch to instead of Dizzy Swing to chop them down. Next up is Dawnbreaker, deals physical damage and stuns, essentially proccing our Hrothgars on our front bar. Also, you can fully charge heavy attack for that follow-up passive to get 10% more damage on it. That's the trick to bursting down people or groups, is try to proc all of that at once. Going to our back bar, we have our armor buff, Ice Fortress. It's going to be armor buff and minor protection. That also stacks with major protection. Speaking of which, major protection, Blinding Flare. This is from the Alliance War support skill line. Slotting it is going to give us a major protection on our back bar, and then also you can activate it, and it's a hard counter to gankers. Essentially, if your Ice Fortress is up, you're on your back bar, and your Blinding Flare is up, you're taking a whole lot of less damage. So that's very, very good to counter the burst meta that's out there right now, especially if you don't have a whole lot of mitigation. Feel free to flex this in for the niche if you like that resource sustain and miss it, but I find myself a lot more survivable using the flare. Next up is Shuffle, mobility tool and AoE damage reduction, and how I typically use this is I cast it, then instantly bar swap and hit birds of prey and zip on out of the area. Takes a bit of practice, but you're going to want to keep this up at all times, and especially if you're locked down with talons, poisons, and mobilizations, pop it again and get out of dodge. This is especially useful to counter Dark Convergence. And why I think high mobility builds do not have a problem with Dark Convergence is because you'll have a way to get rid of the snares and zip on out of dodge and not take a whole lot of damage, so this is quintessential. Race Against Time is an alternative to Shuffle, though it costs magic, and we have a lot of other magic skills as a Stam Warden, so I prefer the medium armor, using 5 or more, and using Shuffle. Arctic Blast is a magic-based heal, but it scales off of your max health, so rewarding you for using Death Dealer's Fate and or stacking a lot of max health. This thing can heal, and if people are peppering you, it will stun them after a while. So you're going to pair that magic heal with a stamina heal, Resolving Vigor, stamina-based heal over time, and I kind of go back and forth depending on which pool is low. Stam's low? No problem. I'll use my magic Arctic Blast. Magic's low? No problem. I'll use Resolving Vigor. I'm getting tunneled? No problem. I'm going to use both of them. Last ability up is Spell Wall, and that's the Sword and Shield, one of the reasons we use it. It's just insane self-survivability tool. Solo, it's just incredible. You can use the trees while you're leveling up early for a nice little bit of heal, and it's super cheap. Or if you're playing in a group and you don't need some solo survivability, switch to Permafrost. This is great group utility. It's going to slow folks down, give major protection for the group, allowing you to do big pushes. So we've talked about the skills, we talked about the gear, let's talk about the combo and how to actually use it. Your goal is to basically, in PvP, do as much damage in a short window as possible. You can do this by timing, working on your timing, and I'm not perfect at it yet either. You're trying to line up a fully charged heavy attack, proc set, Dawnbreaker, and then execute immediately. It's going to take some practice. So how you do this is, you cast Subterranean Assault, and then wait a split second, and then start fully charged heavy attack. Then your sub will launch out simultaneously as your heavy attack lands. That's step one, and you can actually practice this on a dummy or your friends dueling or just running around doing NPCs, but getting that timing down is critical because countering both of those at the same time is very hard for the average player. So once sub lands, once the heavy attack lands, if you're fully leveled up in the two-hander, you're going to have that follow-up passive. You're going to use that follow-up passive to immediately cast a Dawnbreaker. So your ultimate's going to land just simultaneously or just a split second after those two things land. And it's going to be amplified by 10% due to that follow-up passive. So you're going to have 3 things that land along with your poisons, hopefully, as well. It's just a lot of incoming damage. And then you factor in the proc set as another one. You can essentially just one-shot people if you land this all at once. And then assume that they're going to be low if they're not dead already and cast Executioner regardless of their HP just to finish them off. And then you're going to kind of spam and or medium weave dizzying swings until they're about 35% health or lower, then switch to Executioner. And that's kind of your combo. Another point to this build and how to get good at it, and something I've learned recently from some friends like John, is off balance is your friend. While you're doing a dizzying swing spam, you're going to see off balance, essentially giving a circle above the head of your opponent. This is highly useful because a quote-unquote medium weave can stun, and a fully charged heavy attack can give double the stamina sustain. So if you don't know what medium weave is, it's simply in between a light and a fully charged heavy attack. So when you click dizzying swing, what you're gonna do is you're gonna immediately hold down your attack. So left click on my mouse on PC. After about a half to 3/4 of a second, you're gonna let go of that heavy attack button and land a medium weave. This will proc the off bounce and stun the target. Keep in mind, this is going to take a lot of practice, especially if you're under pressure, but it will ramp up your effectiveness dramatically. So if you're out of gas, hit a dizzying swing, then rip off a fully charged heavy attack for some extra resource sustain. If you're trying to pressure them and proc Hrothgars, do a D-swing into a medium weave and knock them down. Those are the tools that will make you much more effective at this build. Let's talk about the miscellaneous things that I would kind of run on this build. And number one, if you're going to start from scratch and this looks really juicy for you, what race would you be and why? Number one, I would pick an Imperial. The reason being is the Imperial is going to give you the most max health and 2,000 stamina, most stamina you can possibly get. Plus the red diamond passive, reduction in cost by 6%, is staggering. This applies to your block, your dodge, your sprint, everything, including your ultimate. So as a Warden, you're going to be using magic and stamina frequently. This is going to keep you in the fight, keep you survivable. Drastic improvement over other races. A couple others ones you could go with is the Orc. It's well-balanced stamina race and it's great for PvP. It has a lot of max stats and weapon damage, plus it's quite fast if you intend to sprint with it. Another one, if you're gonna go the non-proc route, is a Khajiit. It's optimal PvE DPS and has all good around stats, but if you want to swap in mechanical acuity and stat crit damage, Khajiit's your go-to. And you have some options when it comes to consumables. So food, you could go with the Bewitch Sugar Skulls. This is going to give you a blend of max stats. Quite nice if you're going to use magic and stamina frequently. Tripods and or immovable speed. Poisons, escapists that cause immobilizations. Very handy with Hrothgars. Mundus Stone, I think the warrior, which gives weapon damage, is the best all around. Switch to the Shadow though if you plan on using the mechanical acuity loadout, as that will add a lot of damage in your burst window. We're going to talk about attribute points. What's your attribute points be? Well, there's a lot to factor in, but essentially what you want to do is stack a bunch of health. Stamina is not going to ramp up your damage and healing as much as weapon damage because you're going to get amplifications from the agility medium armor passive. So it's kind of a meh stat. On a Warden, you want a ton of max health because Arctic Blast is going to heal you based off of that. Plus, you're going to lower your resistances and stack a lot of max health, so you're not going to get instant nuked by Hrothgar's Chill, someone else running it. So essentially, dump pretty much everything into health. You're going to at least get to 32 to 35,000. And if you see some of this footage from my build, fully buffed, I'm at 42,000. And that's not even with Death Dealer's Fate on, proving you can hit like a truck without a bunch of stamina. Next up is champion point, and my philosophy in PvP is this: survival, way more than damage. So if you set up your burst window right, you know your class, you know your skills, you shouldn't rely heavily on CP to do the job and damage. Thus, my builds typically focus on survivability of the champion points. So those specific ones are Duelist Rebuff, Ironclad, Unassailable, reduction in damage, single target, direct, and AoE. Then I take one offensive one, Master at Arms, increase your damage done with direct damage attacks by 2% per stage. This is really good because pretty much everything is direct damage attack. So 3 defensive ones, 1 offensive. Now we go back to the fitness in the red tree. Celerity is going to increase your movement speed by up to 10%. You're going to put 2 swift jewelry on, and you're going to be faster than running a mythic like Wild Hunt. Expert Evasion, your next dodge roll is free of cost, making you very slippery and hard to get a hold of. Sustained by Suffering, increasing your max magic, health, and stamina recovery while you're on a negative effect. You're always going to be under a negative effect, and this is how we're going to sustain. Pain's Refuge, reduce your damage taken by 1% up to 20% for each negative effect on you. Essentially, you don't cleanse and you put that ability on your back bar, Flare, to reduce the damage. And if people put a bunch of dots on you, you're just going to be harder and harder to kill, no problem. I didn't take max health champion point, and I didn't take armor. I don't see the value outweighing these other selections in my opinion. Plus, on my back bar, I don't block that much, and I don't prefer the bracing anchor passive. The green doesn't affect your performance that much, but if you wanted some, Treasure Hunter, Rationer, Liquid Efficiency, and Steed's Blessing. So that's a build. I stream on Twitch and play this quite frequently, the Eraser. So twitch.tv/Deltiasgaming. Come check out that if you want to see live gameplay all the time. Love this build. I love PvP the way it is. I was very skeptical at first. It's a high burst meta, and you're going to have to get around survivability by high mobility, high HP, lower resistances, and stacking skills and or gear that reward damage reduction over mitigation. Thanks for watching.